Bendiciones. All right, here we go. Soul discussions, shadows within relationships. Pretty psyched. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I send this over to my brother. Blessings, blessings. And so I know we received a number of questions, and we're going to go ahead and start laying them out. And come here, my dear brother. Hey.
Hey.
All right. All right.
This retrograde got me not having any idea how technology works. So I'm happy this is actually happening.
Yeah. Well, blessings, everyone. How's it going? I do want to go ahead and say that, as you guys have your questions, go ahead and type it in. I'm going to say it's perhaps in your right-hand corner where it has the question mark, because we did receive a floodload of questions and comments. And so wanting to start off there. How's it going, brother?
I'm good, Hermano. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
How are you?
We got a big topic.
It's a little one. People are a little interested in this.
I don't know, a little bit. Well, it's definitely, that's why it's part one. So,
Yeah.
I know you've seen the questions that came in.
Yes.
And, as we go into this, I guess let's touch a little bit on it before we dive into the questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is your view?
Well, okay, so you know a bit about my view. And my view on shadow work through and through is that it's about personal responsibility. And I think one of the things that comes up, with the work that I do, I talk a lot about mirrors and mirroring, and the way that consciousness mirrors itself through us and through relationship. And relationships are the ultimate mirror, right? Our intimate relationships. But not only our intimate relationships, like every single relationship that we have is essentially our opportunity to perceive ourselves through the world as the reflection that we see of ourselves, right? Which is the world itself. Like essentially every aspect of our life, every perspective that we have about everything is a reflection of who we are internally. And any aspect of dis-ease, right? Just like any aspect of flow that emerges in our life, emerges from the work that we've done internally to have a sense of balance or a sense of harmony in ourselves and in our life and in our experience. And that takes a lot of work. And when we get into the realm of relationships, first of all, we have to go through a whole lot of deconditioning, because most of us that have been raised in modern society have been raised to believe that the source of our fulfillment or our joy, our happiness in life is external. So we've learned through cultural indoctrination and religious indoctrination and the process of being brought up in a society that perceives things in this way, we've learned that we are internally deficient, right? Como dice mi gente, estamos buscando la media naranja, right? Looking for your half orange, right? Like, what the fuck is that? I'm a full orange, right? And
so you know what? I want to jump in that really quick, because even the idea and the feeling like being fulfilled, right? Finding your other half. there's a lot of souls saying, this is my other half. You fulfill me, right? There's a lot of that. And when we see that, it's automatically stating that we're not whole.
Right.
Right. And honestly, that's one of the common shadows that I see automatically. Is like, hold on, I may feel fulfilled in this moment. I may feel this excitement because I'm around this beautiful soul. And that's why it brings in that feeling of fulfillment. But then what is it that this soul is actually doing? What is this soul actually bringing forth for me that I need to see in myself? And which is not a question that we normally ask ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm. No.
It's something that instead we're just kind of like mesmerized by, like, oh, this feels so good. You know, this person is fulfilling. We're gonna do everything. We're gonna have a whole family. We're gonna go do everything in the world.
All the things. Right.
So, and yeah, and you know, it brings up a lot of like las novelas, right?
Yes, it does.
The love stories that are out there. You know, honestly, I can't wrap myself around of what is the common things as far as, like, you know, the princess being saved, you know, always somebody being saved, you know, and, you know, we see a lot of that, right? And yeah, so even like reflecting really briefly of, you know, when I look at my journey, when I look at my story, I recognize that it started pretty young. I had to save myself, you know, and if it wasn't for me saving myself, I would have had the illusion of believing that someone was going to go ahead and save me, that someone was going to fulfill me. And yes, to my sister, Disney fairy tales of how much the Disney fairy tales, these stories of always a damsel in distress, you know. But then, you know, I would love to hear, like, how is the perspective from the masculine?
So I think we got to start at that root, right? We got to start at the fact that on a very fundamental level, we've been taught for generations that we're incomplete. And that idea that we are incomplete has led to this social tendency of constant grasping outside of ourselves. And it's been something that's been a division on multiple fronts, right? It's not just like I'm incomplete, so I need to have what I need to have out there, and what's out there has to fulfill me, has to make me happy, has to make me whole, which is an impossible idea. It's an impossible endeavor. There's no way that you can ever put that on somebody and expect that person to live up to that. And beyond that, putting that on somebody else means that you're not honoring the fact that that person is a human being who is going to be living their own expression, their own evolution, their own growth, and doesn't really let you appreciate the time that you're spending with that person, because you're constantly projecting onto them your own starvation for meaning and purpose and fulfillment that nobody but you can fulfill, right? So to begin with, we're starting off on the wrong foot, so to speak. Another part of this is that we have another cultural inheritance of having our internal world, our inner life, stripped from us, right? Which means that we are only largely, collectively, experiencing the world from our eyes out, and we don't realize that the entire cosmos exists within us. So what we don't perceive ourselves as physically, we're demanding from what's out there without ever realizing that all of it is inside of us. Without realizing that we are the totality of all of the cosmic energies and their potentials and their reflections and their relationships for each other, right? So we grasp onto a certain identity, or let's say historically people have grasped onto a certain identity, and they've created a really flat and narrow perspective of what that identity is. And they have projected everything that it's not, which largely is just their sense of fulfillment, outwards onto what they don't see themselves as being.
Yeah.
Right? So, and this happens across the board. Right? So it gets really tricky when we start talking about masculine and feminine dynamics, because first, people need to understand that all masculine and all feminine dynamics exist inside of them. All of them do. The entire spectrum of relationship exists inside of each and every one of us, right? And when you have that understanding, where you can start to approach a sense of wholeness, right, that makes you not grasp for what you feel you're lacking outside of yourself, that makes you not want to create somebody that doesn't exist and put the mask of that person that doesn't exist over whoever you're with, and then demand that they live up to the mask that you created based on what you have not learned to give to yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's tricky there, because because there's the polarity of these energies on a cosmic, energetic, and spiritual level, and then there is their physical manifestations, right? And then there's the identity level manifestation of them, right? Which we know are different things, right? And people get hung up on the external dynamics of it without ever turning their gaze inward and starting to understand that a big part of that healing needs to happen inward. So when you ask me what the masculine perspective is, that's my answer. I think the masculine perspective has historically been extremely limited, and it's been starving for the degrees of understanding, right, of what the feminine energy provides, right? Not from somebody from the outside, but from the inside. But I'd go a step further than that and say that as a collective, we don't understand healthy masculinity. And that goes for both men and women, mm-hmm. right? Or that goes for both people that identify as men or women, or people that identify as neither or both or every mm-hmm. aspect of the spectrum. We don't culturally understand a idea of healthy masculinity. So all of the projections that we have of what masculine is out into the world, whether they're conscious or not, are actually projections of a very warped and pathological and wounded perpetual adolescence of a male gender, which is not masculinity. And so it's tricky, because from the perspective of a man, right, that feels very much in my masculine essence, it is actually challenging for men to speak about being men. Right? It is challenging for men to speak about aspects of masculinity that are only perceived through the pathological side. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting, because I mean, I do men's groups, and I've been working. I mean, I don't exclusively work with men, but I've been really drawn to doing this work with men my whole life. And a large part of it, like, I can tell you the point in time in my life when I was 10 years old, and I consciously had the awareness that there were no men anywhere around me. There were a lot of boys of advanced age, but there were no men. Right? And it's been a really, really long journey in learning more and more about all of those dynamics. And what I find over and over and over again, actually, is that there are a lot of men that feel like they're voiceless. They actually can't talk about what it is to be men unless what they're talking about fits a convention that's out there right now that says this is all toxic, this is all, whatever, woke, right? But they don't realize that like they don't fit into the like woke agenda, because largely the woke agenda is a product of intellectualization and not really a product of lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so that brings up this whole other thing where I was talking about these splits that have been enforced in the world that we experience and as we experience it. A big part of that split has separated the body from the mind. And the spirit is largely connected to the body. We can use our mind and our intellect to try and wrap our heads around a bunch of different things. But I don't care how many deep conversations you have about, say, going surfing. I don't care how many deep conversations you have about going surfing. I don't care how many books you read about it. I don't care how many documentaries you watch about surfing. If you've never got on the board and swam out into the ocean and felt yourself at the mercy of that immense mystery, you don't really know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And we live in a society that functions that way. Like, it's a spectator society, right? So people feel like they can be outside of a situation, watching something, and a perspective or an opinion about what they're watching, it strikes the right chord in them because they identify with it, or their wound identifies with it, right? And they can say, yeah, that's right, right? And that's wrong. And they'll say, like, all of these aspects of how men present are wrong. All of these aspects of how they're supposed to present are right. But something really interesting happens at the level of the body. So what people talk and what they actually do and what they lean into tend to be very, very different things.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to jump in because as you see, this can really go into many, many, many different areas. And even seeing it from the perspective of how witnessing how much women has embodied the masculine, witnessing how they feel in the sense of needing to be more in control, being more of like, it's that power struggle, honestly, the power struggle that I've witnessed within women in general. And it's because they've haven't had the opportunity to really see much of that balanced masculine in their outside world.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they had to embody it. They had to see like, okay, for me to really feel safe, I have to be more masculine. Mm-hmm. And through that process, they end up suppressing a part of themselves. They end up suppressing their feminine self. They end up suppressing their creativity. They end up suppressing their waters, their connection with who they naturally are, as compared to also, yes, recognizing that we do hold that feminine and masculine within us, but they end up having an overcome of masculine within them in their bodies, and their emotional and their mental and their spiritual body. So they end up moving into, and I've seen this, and I work with men and women. I've seen this of how it's all about the intellect. It's all about what you know. And it does bring into the part of like, okay, if I know this, that's mean I embody this. And that's where you were mentioning, like, until you actually experience this. And this is why I really appreciate our teachers. I really appreciate bringing us out into the experiences, hands-on, is we embody it by living it, where it's not just pleasure, it's going through the struggles, it's going through that ripping moments in life to really rip us open into that next journey, into that next experience, into that next growth. So that's, a little bit on the masculine and feminine. I want to dive into these questions. And because we did receive a whole lot of questions that came in.
Right.
And let's see, how I'm going to do this. Okay. So how to maintain the fire, passion within relationships.
So I think a big part of that has to do with purpose and has to do with boundaries. You know, in this tradition that I'm steeped in, that I teach and talk about, one of the foundational things that we come to over and over and over again, right, is the importance of polarities and of maintaining polarities. And so polarities are really interesting because they're not in opposition, right? They're not in a struggle, because they're not separate. Right? Polarities exist in something that's unified, but that at the extreme ends of that unification, like each part contains its own essence and maintains its own essence. And I think that requires a lot of self-awareness on the behalf of both people, mm-hmm. to understand what it is to maintain their own essence, to understand what it is to maintain their own trajectory and their own boundaries, let's say. I think part of why people lose polarity is because they get caught up in the initial stages of a relationship, and then they expect the initial stage to be the perpetual relationship. You know? And nothing can stay fixed in time and place. Mm-hmm. So both people need to know what they're about and need to continue pursuing what they're about, and not fall into this tendency of losing who they are in the relationship, let's say, or in the characteristics and traits of the other person. But again, it's tricky because at the beginning of relationships, knowingly or unknowingly, many people are not fully honest with who they are. Mm-hmm. Many people will start to take on the characteristics and the traits and the likes and the whims of the other person because they want to get the approval of the other person. Right? Mm. So I think foregoing that need for the person's approval. It's like, how can you intensely love somebody and not need them? Right? How can you intensely love somebody and know that relationship might end tonight or tomorrow, and that it's going to end, right? Like, you might find the love of your life, so to speak, and spend 60 years with that person. At some point, that person's going to die, or you're going to die, and the relationship's going to end. And if you live it out every day knowing that you're going to die and that they're going to die, well, then maybe you could be more present to appreciating who that person is and the time that you have with that person. Mm-hmm. Right? Because a lot of it too is the projection that we make into a future that for the most part doesn't exist.
Yeah. And that's,
so I think
right there. Yeah, mm-hmm. That right there is definitely something, is why it is important that when we are approaching relationships, when we are, perhaps even souls that are currently in relationships, because this does bring in another approach Because if you're now becoming aware of like, oh damn, I'm noticing myself relying on him more. Like not even more, just relying on him as you become awake and aware of yourself. So let's say you're not in a relationship. That's where that question is. All right, how fulfilled am I before I go ahead and start jumping into a relationship? So that I'm able to hold that essence of unconditional love for another soul that just happens to be in my space, for another soul that I would love to share that journey with. So, because it's kind of like really sharing ourselves, but still holding ourselves first, which is one of the biggest things is that, you know, the reason why we end up reshaping ourselves or what we believe or what that person desires, we end up losing ourselves through that. Mm-hmm. You know, we end up losing ourselves of believing that the person will only accept me if I'm like this. And I've worked with beautiful souls who literally changed their whole way of how they look because they believed that their partner will only accept them in one way. And now they're on a journey of like literally deprogramming themselves and removing that story, removing that shadow, removing that, even that idea that they couldn't even show all of themselves. And now they're like, okay, wow, I have never been myself for the past 10 years I've been with him. There's been souls that's been in relationships for over 10 to 15 to 20 years not being themselves, even more than that. Mm-hmm. And so for the souls that are just starting relationships or even going in, what I bring forward in the sense of the question is like, how are you growing with this relationship? How is your growth? Do you see yourselves growing? Because Oscar, you mentioned earlier of how recognizing that the relationship is not going to be the same how it was in the beginning. And that's good that it's not, because you're constantly in the stages of growth. You're constantly realizing and getting to know each other. And it's answering to the question of how to maintain fire and passion within a relationship. It's so, for me, I can say it's so easy because the journey of working on the self is because, all right, how is this relationship igniting? How are we growing together within this relationship? How are we moving from where we originally started and where we originally met? And if we're lacking the growth, then we got to check ourselves. If we're stagnant and because we're so, in the loss of the blissfulness of feeling good with one another, it's honestly, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with it, but it comes back again to when we cross paths with souls, is not just for us to just be with each other. It's more than that. Mm-hmm. It's that masculine and feminine that are embodied physically to meet for a purpose, mm-hmm. not just for a desire, not just for pleasure, not just to create in reference to bringing a child into the world. Is more. Mm-hmm. So even for the souls that split, that are separated from their partner, what are the lessons that you've learned through it?
Yeah. See, so, I think that's the thing, and that hits another really major point, right? So again, like we can agree, happily ever after doesn't exist, because if nothing else, someone's gonna die, right? So we can just like leave that, right? Happily ever after doesn't exist. But happily ever after never exists in any other realm of your life either, because life is not just about being happy. Life is about experiencing the full spectrum of human experience and human emotion. And so another reason that there's so many people that are unhappy is because they're expecting to always be happy. Mm. They're thinking that happy is like the epitome of life and living, right? But it's not. It's not. We're here to experience many, many things aside from happiness. Like we are here to experience happiness, experience joy, but we're not here to live in perpetual experience or joy. Right? And in that same way, nothing that we're here to experience is meant to last forever. Right? There are people that can grow together, and they can grow together for a long time. There are people that can grow together intensely for a short amount of time. But I think it's important for people to know what their internal guidance says about how they're growing and where they're growing and when they need to keep growing and they can no longer keep growing with the person they're with. Because I see a lot of suffering in people too that are like, how do I change my partner? How do I make my partner become more spiritual? How do I make my partner do this? How do I make my partner do that? The answer is you can't make anybody do anything. And wanting to impose your will on that person and change that person is a reflection back of something that's going on inside of you. So it's been really interesting because I've had, over the course of time, I've had different people come to me and approach me in that way and say, hey, can you work with my partner? Well, what's wrong with your partner? Well, my partner is this and this and this and this, and I want them to be this and this and this and this and this, but like they just don't get it. So can you work with them? And the first thing I say to them is, I can work with you. I can work with you because you're the one that's coming to me, right? You cannot make somebody change that doesn't feel like they need to change. And again, it's a massive current in society, right? Where people haven't gotten that memo. So there are entire populations and social groups of people that are out there that are trying to change entire other groups of people by force. Mm-hmm. Right? I think we call that colonialism. And it doesn't matter what agenda, right? It doesn't matter. The only thing that we can ever change in our lives is ourselves. You know? Mm-hmm. So whenever we're faced with those kinds of things, I mean, sometimes we have to make decisions that really hurt. Sometimes we have to look at a relationship that we've been in for a long time with someone that potentially we really love. We really feel emotional attachment to, an emotional connection to. And we got to ask ourselves, is my love or my attachment, let's say, my attachment, not love, is my attachment to this person more important than my love for myself? Right? And that's a huge, huge question, because another thing that we're not taught in this society is how to approach sacrifice, how to approach difficult decisions, you know, and how to own them, really, and say, okay, this is going to really, really hurt. But if I really love this person, I'm not going to attach myself to them knowing that I've outgrown them, because then I'm depriving that person that I supposedly love of the experience of meeting someone that is growing at the pace and in the direction that they're growing. And what happens when people attach themselves to a situation that is no longer allowing for growth in themselves is that they start to rot internally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as they start to rot internally, that rot spreads to every aspect of their life, including that person that they supposedly love. Yeah. We call that resentment. And I mean, it's all Disney's fault, right? It comes back to happily ever after. Fucking Disney. Bastards.
Yeah. And honestly, everything has really shaped of how we really see love, right? Like everything outside of us. We haven't really seen a good example. And this is why we're actually rewriting the story right now. Yeah. We're actually rewriting it in the sense of, all right, how can I make sure my love for myself is the beginning, the start of it? Right. And, you know, just like how you were saying, how can I make sure that I'm not allowing myself to suppress myself because I'm just attached to this other person, because I'm comfortable with this other person. that we've been together for so long. And so I can't give up now, you know? And that's where that story comes in, that attachment. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for you to go ahead and, all right, how much you love yourself. Mm-hmm. And how can you also check yourself and see for yourself, like, all right, how am I actually growing? Do I feel in peace? Do I feel fulfilled? Like, what do I feel that's missing that I feel like this person needs to fulfill it for me? And that's where we end up seeing, you know, again, and I'm going to say this in reference to like the relationships I've been in. And I'm going to say the longest relationship I was in was 11-year relationship. And it played a role where he held the essence of the masculine for me, but in a very unique way that I relied on him to hold that and not me embody it for myself. Mm-hmm. And so when I realized that, it took some time, but he also played a huge role in my growth. Mm-hmm. And what's beautiful is that as we continue to move within the path of spiritual growth and spiritual embodiment and really tapping into ourselves, we end up realizing like, okay, how we're making sure that we're still growing. And that's why, you know, I appreciate this beautiful soul I was with for 11 years, because it moved and transitioned to where our growth was beyond the romantic relationship. Our growth was beyond the intimate relationship. And we were able to make that next step where we still have love for each other as love, as brothers, as like literally like family. That now we still like, we didn't separate due to the lack of love. We separated because we recognize there is something more to us that's beyond us. And we like fulfilled that purpose. We fulfilled the reason why we came together. And this is where I want to bring forward in reference to relationships in general, of like really checking in, because a lot of the questions that came in had to do about like, how about, you know, if I'm awakening, but my partner isn't, you know? Right. First, I say, you know, acknowledging the fact that you guys been together for a while, and really, you know, be with you and make sure for you as you make this next step in your journey that you feel it in your heart and your spirit on what is that next step. And it could look however, and that's you surrendering. It's a journey of surrendering and trusting your choices and making sure it's not falling into a space of just what feels comfortable and what feels safe. Because like you mentioned, like the sacrifice, where it feels like a sacrifice, right? But it's just us really like breaking through, how they say, like when you put pressure amongst to make diamonds, right? Mm-hmm. When you do things like it requires this breakthrough, this next level of yourself. It's not going to feel good, and it's okay. So, well,
like the origin of the word sacrifice is to make sacred. It's to make something sacred, and it brings a lot up, right? In terms of that, a relationship can be released and it can be grieved in a sacred way, in a way that maintains the sacredness of it, right? That doesn't need to end in animosity. It doesn't need to end in like, you made a victim of me, or, you know, which is also the tendency, right? Because in order to break this story of happily ever after, people feel like they have to make somebody the villain, right? Instead of being able to have that kind of self-awareness and that love for that person that they've been with for however long, and respect that person, right? And say, okay, I love who you are, I love who you've been for me, and thank you very much for that, but it's my time to move on. Or it's your time to move on, which is also an enormous act of love, right? Act of sacrifice, you can say. But it keeps coming back to self-awareness and self-knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that is not something that anybody else can provide for any of us. Right? People mirror back to us consistently where we are, who we are, where we're headed. But they're not the ones that are seeing the mirror image. A lot of times, most people don't see the mirror image for themselves either.
Yeah.
And instead of taking personal responsibility, they want to blame the external.
Yeah.
They want to blame the person they're with. You're not making me happy. You're not awakening, and I am. That's some woke shit to say.
Yep. And that's honestly, that's a heavy thing right there. That's a heavy thing of blame, of pointing fingers, of criticizing, and just actually judging another person of where they're at.
Yeah.
And honestly, that right there is really interesting, because it really brings us into a space of, again, coming back into that unconditional love. Mm-hmm. Coming back to that heart space, because, you know, we have that new age of woke, right? Of how everything is all love and light.
That's right.
And yet at the same time, we have to check ourselves when we're really looking at this journey of evolution, mm-hmm. this journey of growing beyond ourselves, but still holding in and not projecting our shit onto others. Because that's just what it is. Like, hold on, you know, kind of touching in on what we were saying earlier of like, we know that a lot of us are searching for someone to fulfill us. Mm-hmm. That still applies to that too. Mm-hmm. Of being fulfilled because that person is not awoke as you are. You know, so you're kind of searching, like you're not awake, you know, so, you know, you don't know what he's talking about. You don't know where you're at. Like, hold on, you're already like projecting your shit to him or to her. Mm-hmm. So and again, it does something that like, all right, that's why it comes back to the self. It comes back to one person of like, how do I feel of where I'm at? Where am I in my journey? Where am I within my growth? How am I really looking at these things that are coming forward within my life, where it does, again, move us into this next experience, this next journey within a relationship. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go into the questions because I was like, what, 3 questions out of like 20?
Well, you did say part 1, right?
I did say part 1. So this is a good one. How to know the one versus casual dating.
Go look in the mirror. That's where you're going to find the one.
Yeah. That's all he wrote. You know, all right, so I'm going to speak on it. You know, as far as casual dating, okay, granted, we're making sure that we're not limiting ourselves, right? We're not, and I'm going to speak on this because I've witnessed this on a lot of beautiful souls. Hi.
There you go.
Of beautiful souls that will love the companionship, mm-hmm. right? So they would love that person right beside them, to go on this journey with them, to go ahead and really see the one, you know, be that lifetime partner. And that's why, you know, that's why I totally feel you on your response, brother, because your response is so accurate, is that look at the mirror. This is you. This is your masculine, this is your feminine self right in front of you to fulfill you. So why keep searching outside of you? So I'm gonna really break this open just a little bit, because honestly, a lot of the things that I've heard, like people calling in and manifesting and wanting to say, like, I want my partner to be like this, like that, like this. You know, I want him or her to be like this. Like, hold on, how are you like this for yourself?
Mhm.
How are you tending to yourself on those levels? How are you, and I'm going to speak in reference to like the women, you know, my beautiful sister queens, like, how are you loving up yourself so much? How are you making your environment all sacred? Because, you know, like, ooh, if I have my man, he'll go ahead and move these things out, put in the candles. How are you doing that for you? How are you taking yourself out? You know, how are you making sure that you embody this part of yourself so that it naturally comes towards you because you already embody it within you? So that is one of the biggest things that I speak in reference to my beautiful sister queens, is like, how are you making sure that what you are calling out and wanting to see within the physical plane of this beautiful soul that you're calling, how are you showing that for you? And that's when you know. And granted, we do cross paths with souls that may be karmic souls. I'm going to bring that forward because it is true. It challenges us. It brings up some things that we need to work on. It brings up some things that we need to face and see, because we may fall back a little bit because we see this beautiful soul that, like, oh, he's embodying everything that I know, everything that I've been calling in. That's him. That's him. Oh, you know, I'm getting all psyched and hooked, you know. And then you might notice you lacking. You might notice you lacking on yourself and how you showed up for yourself, because now he has fruitioned. He has showed himself. But then no, it's an opportunity for you to continue to show yourself within yourself.
Right.
So, and again, it comes down to, you're sharing a journey, you're sharing your space, you're sharing your love. And for any reason, if that soul disappears, is gone,
Someone gonna die.
someone is going to die.
No, but so the reason I say the one, right, is because the only one that we're gonna be with perpetually until the last moment is ourselves.
Yeah.
And falling in love is beautiful, right? Falling in love is amazing.
Mm.
Learning with somebody is beautiful, right? And it's beautiful when it's challenging. It's beautiful when it hurts, right? But can we see that, right? Then it's beautiful when it's joyful, right? And the thing is that it's beautiful in every single aspect of the spectrum of experience, because for the duration of that spectrum of experience, we were alive.
Mm.
And we got to share that with someone else. But first things first, we were alive. Right? And I think, I say these things in a sense, joking around and like being a little facetious, but I bring it back to that a lot, right? Because bottom line, one day we're not gonna be. And it's not to be morbid, it's to say, how much do we value this absolute blessing that we have right here, right now, right this moment? And if we're putting ourselves in a situation where we're not honoring that adequately, nobody's responsible for it but us.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so it's funny because people get into all of these questions, these ideas, right? Like when someone asks, like, how do I find the one? Like, my suggestion is, what does the one look like to you? Like, get really, really clear on that. what are the characteristics of the one, right? But first, before that, what does the one make you feel? And why don't you feel that right now? You know,
And of course, you're asking these freaking deep questions, brother. You got me like, that's right. How does that one feel like? I was
that's
like,
the
all
fun
right, you
part.
got me in a zone like usual, brother.
That's the fun part, though, right?
Yes, it is. And you know, I love it because this is something that we really need to sit with and be with and honor and recognize that it is possible and it does exist. And why it is important for us to really be in these spaces to ask our questions internally so that we can really embody it for ourselves. You know, it's a really, 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 really deep question. And I love it. And it brings in that internal journey, that self-awareness again. You know, and it did bring in another part of, and I had to write this down, is like, you know, for the souls that are asking these questions, and either if you're single or if you're not single, if you're with somebody, you can still ask this question, you know, because that's, again, it's coming back to you. It's not external. It's not outside of you. It's inside of you. Because the more you embody within you, your partner lays beside you, or you're with each other, you guys hold intimate spaces. Relationships are sacred. They're sacred. When we hold an exchange within relationships, and I'm speaking right now, all relationships are sacred, first of all. But when we're speaking romantically, intimately, it's sacred. There's an exchange that happens between two souls that you share amongst each other. You guys are so one together. And so as you see yourself, that's why I mentioned, like, don't go into a space of judging and saying how, like, you're not awoke, you're not this. Like, no, like, you're saying that to yourself. And this is why it's so important that you ask these questions for yourself and saying, how does the one feel? How does that one, how do I feel? And then as you have these internal questions while you're in a relationship, your mate is going to feel it. Your partner is going to feel it. And that way, because you have that divine connection and you still doing your self-work and being with yourself through that process, it will take some time and you will be tested. I'm going to say the word tested, but you will be brought up the journey of what needs to come up in between you. Because again, it gets us into that growth. It gets us into that space of how are we going to go ahead and start projecting our shit onto others, and especially a partner who we shared our life with. So this does come into, like, really honoring yourself is really honoring and being alive. How alive are you? Like Oscar was saying, how alive are you within your own journey and within the journey you are with the soul, the beautiful person that you're with, no matter what has happened? Because there was a moment when you both were deeply in love. So if you're struggling, there was a moment where you were deeply in love and you guys saved each other for that time. You know?
Yeah. And like those moments are and were the gifts, right? Because like that's another thing that we're very conditioned to think, right? Like the dessert comes later, right? Like we're still waiting for the prize. And in that process of still waiting for the prize, we don't realize all of the immense beauty that we've lived up until now. We don't stop and reflect and realize that, you know. So a person can be really dissatisfied in a relationship and constantly looking at what it's not and not holding the space for all of the beauty that it gave them up until that point. And so again, it becomes that question, what's the person growing towards? And that's a question only each person can answer for themselves. Nobody can give that to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not a romantic partner, not a spiritual teacher, nobody can give that to you but yourself.
Yeah.
And so projecting your dis-ease or your discomfort or your dissatisfaction onto anything or anyone is always a mirror back to what's going on inside. You know, I'm not saying it's an easy mirror to look at. There are things that are in that mirror that you're like, God damn. Right? That's why most people want to just give it to someone else. That ain't me, that's you. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we're reaching our time already. Just kind of crazy. We did receive questions, and besides, honestly, there's a whole lot. But I'm going to just go and jump into a question that was typed in, which we did receive a few questions here.
Okay.
So where do feelings of loneliness come from, and what do these feelings say about the individual within?
Okay. All right.
We got a minute.
We got a minute.
I mean, maybe we don't have set minute, but I think like back and forth, we're gonna have to do like a minute or so.
Mm-hmm. So I think, all right, feelings of loneliness, I think there are many aspects to those feelings of loneliness. I think throughout the course of our lives, we have been hacked apart to fit into certain roles and into certain expectations. And there are parts of us that at our core, we are starving for, we're longing for. And a big part of that loneliness are the parts of you that you abandon along the way to become something that somebody else might approve of. That's a huge part of that loneliness. I think another part of that loneliness is that we come from something much greater than we can ever imagine. And to become these finite things that we are, we had to separate our awareness of being that. So I think there are certain types of loneliness that are never, ever going to go away. And those parts of loneliness are actually also really, really beautiful. Because they bind us in a way to the mystery of what it is to be alive. And what may be when we're no longer here.
Yes. So it comes back to how we are on this journey of really rediscovering ourselves. It really brings us into that space of why self-awareness and self-knowing and self-love is so important when you feel those moments of feeling alone, feeling half, you know, is really being curious throughout your life. Being curious of like, okay, what part of me do I feel that feels alone? What part of me is actually starving and craving? And this is where we go in further into rediscovering who we are into that mystery, into that beautiful divine journey that we're on. And this is why it's so beautiful that, our soul and our spirit has guided us into crossing paths with individuals to just hold that mirror up and to remind us. And I want to bring this forward in the sense of, like, if you find someone attractive, if you find someone that really ignites you, and you see that ignition and you see that part, like, ooh, that person is playing a role that I wish I had. That means that's just a reminder. That's a mirror for you to go ahead and check it out for yourself, to check it out within you. Spirit just allow for that soul to come to your path to just see, not to just attach, not to attach to that, but to allow yourself to be curious in the sense of, really diving further within your journey. So, and yes, I see someone put down, loneliness is an illusion.
So is everything, my friend.
Yes, it is. And we're constantly unveiling so many things that is coming and moving. And yeah, and this is why we are moving into a space of recognizing that this soul discussion on relationships is part 1
of 235. That's it. It's a podcast.
Yes.
What do we do?
Exactly. And yeah, I want to say that this is my brother Oscar, as we're down to perhaps another few seconds. This is my brother Oscar, that he offers amazing medicine. And to my beautiful brothers out there, he offers a men's fire council every other Monday. Check out his page, Attending the Fires. We all need a good balance of space holders of masculine and feminine. I have my teacher and mentor who is a masculine and feminine, to really hold that. Because honestly, I'm going to say this for myself, like, it's important for someone to hold that mirror up for me. And so definitely check out my brother. And for my beautiful sister queens, you already know, we have our women's gathering every single month. And again, this is coming back into your own self-growth, to your own self-awareness, to your own self-journey, and just recognizing as soon as that moment you feel bored, you ain't being curious about life, honey. And this is a moment for you to really dive in further into yourself. So, yes. So definitely stay tuned. And any words, brother?
Just thank you. Thank you. It's great being here with you. Let's do more.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed night. Definitely give yourself a chance to journal. This will be posted. I'm realizing we still have a minute or so. I didn't get the signal yet because I know last time that shit was cut off. But journal, put it out, and know that we're here. We're here, and we're not on this journey alone. By the way, it's a full moon. And the full moon is all in the space of completion, all in the space of, like, really cleansing yourself too. And it has to do with your foundations right now. And how are you aligning with your truest self? So we are on a journey of really connecting with our truest self. When we look at these relationships, we are connecting with our other half. So that question again, can you say that questions again, brother? As far as, like, how does that person feel, right? How does that person make you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're looking for the one, you got to ask yourself, okay? So what are the characteristics of the one? How does the one make you feel? And why is it that you're not feeling that on your own as it is? Like, what do you need to give yourself, right, to become the one.
Oh.
Then, without being attached, you can fully experience someone for who they are.
Yes. So witness the journey, family. Love it and trust it. And know that it's an ongoing journey. So, bendiciones.
Prometeo.
Mateo.